possibly one of the indirect implications is that, for instance, if we intend now to continue cooperation with Carleton University, we will fall under the regulations that are enacted in Georgia, and we will become, we will have to register ourselves as foreign influence agents or something like that, yeah? And this is not unrelated to what happens there, so it's quite related. And yeah, I see the speakers, very impressive lineup, and I think very interesting topics, and I think this is the right time and also possibly the right place to discuss these issues. And again, I really thank you and wish the conference success, and to wish ourselves the continuation and follow up on those activities and cooperation. Thank you very much. I wasn't advised what's next, so.
Okay, I will start. Is this working? Yeah?
A little bit
Closer. So, mogę zamienić chwilę, kiedy kurs training uprzyjemnienia konferencji. I am Jeff Sahadeo, the professor of Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies at Carleton University, historian by trade, but very happy to be one of the main directors of this project, which is Eastern Europe and Transatlantic Network of Carleton University, which is funded by Canada's Department of National Defense. And so I'm very proud to have worked with my colleagues to bring this conference beyond the battlefield, the effects of the Russia-Ukraine war on international security here. I want to briefly highlight here the importance of this conference for Canada and Canadians, and I hope for Georgia and Georgians also. I owe a deep debt of gratitude to my colleagues at Tbilisi Free University, in particular Tinatin Karosanidze and Alexander, and the conference organizer Tuno Chomikidze for all their work in putting this event together. So, Tidi Maglova, Shim's colleagues, Tbilisi University. We all know that Russia's full-scale invasion, as my colleague just mentioned, of Ukraine in 2022 has irrevocably altered the international security environment. So we received funding for this network from the Canadian government to examine three particular fields, all of which we'll talk about today and tomorrow. The first being European security, including the countries of the European Union and of NATO. Of course, Canada is a NATO member. Arctic security. Canada is, of course, a major player in the Arctic, massive coastline there, but its Arctic flank is extremely under-resourced. And the world's major powers, which now include China, as well as Russia, of course, the United States, and other major European powers, are viewed increasingly as competitors there instead of colleagues. And then finally, Eurasian security, which includes the Caucasus, and Georgia, where we understand the strategic geopolitical importance of the location, in particular the Black Sea, which we'll be talking about a lot during this conference. Canada also has long-standing ties from active diaspora to Armenia, and we look as far east as China, which of course has become a critical actor in Georgia too. One of the goals of our project is to decenter Russia, to include it as only one of many regional actors in critical changes in international security. Its invasion of Ukraine needs to be examined in a broader regional context, as we see everything from the rise of assertive populism across Europe and the growing use of military means in Eurasian border disputes. We could look to Karabakh in 2020, we could look to Tajikistan-Kyrgyzstan dispute as well, but of course Russia's invasion of Ukraine dwarfs those in scope. Canada's place in a new, ever-changing global security architecture remains at once critical, both domestically and internationally, and as I would say right now, undetermined. Canada has been at or near the bottom of NATO members in military spending for years, far below NATO's 2% GDP target on defense spending. And we're still struggling to find ways to get there. And this is even as we see threats in the Arctic and the role that we can play in European integration security. We have troops based in Latvia right now, but our goals remain diffuse. Certainly Donald Trump's threats to annex Canada as a 51st state or impose severe costs on us has focused us on the importance of hard as well as soft power, but where this goes, we do not yet know. I won't pretend here to speak for my Georgian friends and colleagues on the internal and external security challenges you have faced and continue to face, from having portions of your territory occupied to external interference in so many aspects of life that are precious in your country, including security, liberty, and democracy. Concepts such as a rules-based international order and collective defense are endangered, but hopefully not defunct. Canada and Georgia are both countries right now dealing with aggressive neighbors who have malign intentions towards liberal regimes. If you imagine me saying this even a year ago to my Canadian students, but I'm saying it now. From Canada's perspective at least, although Georgia will probably teach us some lessons about living beside a very hostile annexationist power. We'll see how it goes for us. At least we're not small enough to geography. So how do we handle Canada and Georgia emerging threats in this new security environment where we cannot even hope to approach more powerful neighbors and countries of hard power? What are our regional and international rules? What are our responsibilities as states and as citizens to protect cherished elements of our identity and our independent political systems? As Ukraine's recent attacks on Russia show just this week, asymmetric warfare can be powerful but unpredictable, with relatively inexpensive weapons wreaking significant havoc, but also inviting retaliation. But what I look forward to the most at this conference is how we can use this question of beyond the battlefield to understand security in a global environment where, on the one hand, hard power seems to be an ever greater focus, but on the other, security means so much more than that. Energy security, climate security, personal and group economic security, cyber security, information security. All of these thematics will be discussed here today and tomorrow, and they all intertwine in the uncertain future that we face. One part of our own mandate at the East European and Transatlantic Network through Carleton University is to train and mentor students and junior colleagues, not just at Carleton, but also here in Georgia and here at this university. And just to highlight again, the cooperation I've had with Alexander and Tinatin over the last 5 or so years, and we hope to continue exchanges both at student and researcher level of knowledge, and hopefully personal exchanges as well, to mentor students and junior colleagues, to prepare them to take the lead in this complex field, to have them consider critical issues with nuanced analysis and evidence-based recommendations. And so that's what we'll be doing today and tomorrow. I'm especially excited this event will allow for global connections, so not just between Canada and Georgia directly, but they will be able to think more broadly of how to contribute to European security, and it will learn a lot from each other and establish frameworks for further long-term cooperation. So what I want to do now is pass us over to my colleague Neil Hauer, who is a Canadian journalist and analyst specializing in the Caucasus, Russia, and Ukraine. From 2014 to 2017, Neil served as a senior intelligence analyst at the Executive Group. His primary focus encompasses Chechnya, regional political violence, and the Syrian conflict, particularly Russia's involvement. His articles have appeared in prominent publications, including CNN, The Guardian, and Foreign Policy. Neil's a consultant on security governance and radicalization for organizations like the European Union and the OSCE, And another good reason to have Neil here, not just for his expertise and his ability to transmit messages very effectively, is he's a graduate of our program, so he holds an MA in Russian and Eurasian Studies from Carleton University. He's now based in Yerevan, but he's also lived in Tbilisi for a while, frequently travels through the former Soviet Union and Middle East, reporting most frequently on active conflicts. So, thank you.
Okay, so without further ado, thank you, Jeff, for introducing me, and thank you to Tbilisi Free University for hosting this. I'm happy to be here. Yeah, as Jeff said, I'm a Carleton graduate myself from the master's program in 2016, and I was inspired enough by the caucuses that the next year after that, 2017, I moved here, and I've lived for the last 8 years in the region, first in Tbilisi and now in Yerevan. And so it's been great, and as part of that, you know, I've been working mostly as a journalist for the last 5 or 6 years, and then especially focused on conflicts in the former Soviet Union, particularly Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict, and then over the last 3.5 years, the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine also. And so my presentation is going to be focusing on, you know, themes and trends in the Russia-Ukraine war, where we're at now, important recent developments, and where we're likely to go over the next, let's say, 12 to 18 months. And the opening photo on my slide deck here is a photo that I took at the entrance to Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, Luhansk Oblast in mid-May 2022, about 2 weeks before the Russians conquered those towns. And so I've been to Ukraine 6 times for reporting trips since the start of the war, the full-scale war, at which time I was in Kiev. And so I'm going to infuse a little bit of my own personal insights from the ground and talking to Ukrainian soldiers and servicemen in with my presentation also. All right, so one thing I think that's really important with the Russian invasion of Ukraine to keep in perspective is the reality versus narrative. And you know, it's just a tendency inherent in the media, and especially in our social media, clickbait-driven 24-hour news cycle world, that you know, either one thing is true or the opposite thing is true. And you know, if you read a lot of the headlines over the past, let's say, since the start of 2024, past 18-ish months for Russia-Ukraine, they're pretty much universally negative for Ukraine. You know, and it's true that it's been a tough year for Ukraine. There wasn't a lot of notable successes for them to trumpet. There was no dramatic breakthroughs like there were in late 2022 in the war when they retook swaths of territory. But also, you know, Russia's successes are not nearly as dramatic as one might think, if one just sees the tone of media reports. And so you can see here, and these are 2 maps taken from one of the better sources mapping the control of territory on the ground in Russia-Ukraine. You can see here, this is the end result of 12 months of basically sustained offensive activity for Russian forces in Ukraine across 2024. The one on the left being January 2024, and the one on the right being 12 months later. And if you can't tell, if you can hardly tell a difference between the 2 maps, that is the point. I mean, Russia's, throughout the cost of incredible amounts of casualties, tens of thousands, as well as extra thousands of pieces of military hardware destroyed, Russia advanced to the degree of capturing an additional 0.66% of Ukraine's territory, and that effectively consisted of Avdiivka at the start of last year, some slight maneuvering, another small town or 2 here and there, and that was it. That was the extent of their success throughout the course of 12 full months. So this ties into the broader theme of my presentation, which is essentially mutual exhaustion between the 2 sides, and how both sides are losing their capabilities to make any major changes in territorial control on the ground. And so there's 2 key issues here that I want to talk about that I think play into this. And the first of those issues is manpower. And this manifests itself in similar but also very different ways for both Russia and Ukraine. And for Russia, one of the ways that this is manifesting itself is Russia is trying to do everything in its power to maintain troop levels and maintain sufficient manpower without having result to any mobilization. We saw it happen. We also saw it happen in late 2022 when the Kremlin announced partial mobilization in September that year in response to losses on the ground. And it was chaotic, and it led to a huge domestic upheaval and big disturbances in Russia. And so since that time, Russia has done sort of everything, the Kremlin has done sort of everything in its power to avoid having to do that again. And so they've taken a number of different approaches to trying to keep the manpower level up. One of them is, the most significant, I think, is just massively expanding salaries for contract servicemen, which have gone up, by to the degree of they've become 4 or 5 times higher they've grown by 4 or 5 times as much in the last 6-12 months in certain regions of Russia, so the salaries have just ballooned massively to the point where they're now, incredibly good. Where the military was always a good work opportunity in the provinces of Russia, now in some areas it's incredibly, almost unbelievably good. But the fact that Russia is raising it to this degree shows that they're increasingly the more willing recruits have already been recruited, have already been taken. And this is coming in these salaries are being raised in the wake of two of the other avenues that Russia had of increasing manpower, which one was recruiting in prison and the other was recruiting especially heavily among ethnic minorities. So areas like Dagestan or Buryatia or other ethnic minority regions of Russia where there's much more recruits per capita than the norm for ethnic Russian regions of the country. But now we're seeing that those are becoming increasingly less significant sources of manpower. And now we see also, of course, infamously over the last 6 to 8 months, the North Korean presence in the war taking place in the fighting in Kursk Oblast inside Russia. But then also, there's been a big growth in mercenaries, foreign mercenaries from all over the place, from former USSR, from sub-Saharan Africa, from South and Southeast Asia, and South Africa as well, to Russia. And so for Ukraine, I would say for Ukraine, the manpower issue is something that's even more salient than for Russia. For Ukraine, they've had the draft, of course, since the start of the war. Conscription, martial law has been in place, but Ukraine has been consistently, and the Ukrainian leadership have been consistently unwilling to institute that for mandatory service for people under the age of 27. And so they finally lowered it from 27 to 25 early last year, after military analysts, Ukrainian and otherwise, saying that it's untenable not to do that. But the unwillingness to draft this younger cohort has added to the problem big time. So now you end up in these scenarios where you do have these scenes from Ukrainian cities of the recruitment officers snatching men and forcing them into handing them the summons, and the men that they do take tend to be people who are older and older and infirm, not super healthy. Even even 2 years ago already, when I remember watching one of the units training for the newly recruited units training for the summer 2023 counteroffensive, and I think the youngest person out of those 40-odd people would have been 42, 43 years old. And that's something that's sort of gotten worse and not better in the last couple of years. But a part of this is that the issues here are better documented from Ukraine because it's a free country, unlike Russia. So that also gives the impression that they're much worse, but they're not necessarily, and they are worse, but they're not necessarily that much worse on this front. And now another aspect, which I think is this one I would flip. This one I would say is more detrimental for Russia, more of a problem for Russia than it is Ukraine at the moment. The second aspect of this duopoly here is the materiel aspect. The heavy equipment, the tanks, the armored vehicles, the heavy artillery systems that are needed to prosecute the war, and especially offensive operations of the war. And so for Russia, we can see that there's been this massive drawdown of Soviet-era reserve equipment over the last 3 years. And then the image that I posted there, this is one of the best accounts on Twitter that uses both publicly available and then, privately available for purchase satellite imagery of where the main Russian storage and reserve bases, where you can see the level of drawdown at some of these bases. So for instance, this is the tweet in this thread, in this photo here, shows one of Russia's largest tank bases, which housed hundreds of T-72s before the war, and now you can see that everything in red was full before, and now you can see that about half of that is gone. But it's worse than it looks in the terms of the equipment that's most serviceable and that's most easily repairable and made combat ready is taken first, and then you're left. The stuff that's in worse condition is left for later. So out of the stuff that's left, easily could be half of that is completely unable to be refurbished into service. And the numbers are just absolutely staggering. The best tracker of these, the best open source tracker of this data is a blog called EURUS blog, where they use open source intelligence, watching videos and photos from every source available, and identifying individually and verifiably individual pieces of equipment that have been lost by each side in Ukraine. And per their accounts, for Russia, it's over 20,000 pieces of heavy equipment, which includes tanks, primarily tanks, artillery systems, and armored vehicles, which is just an unfathomable amount of material. I mean, Russia had this incredible boom given to it, this incredible Soviet legacy of equipment that was massive, true, but it's not unlimited, and it's a one-time thing. It's the stuff the stuff that they are sustaining losses of at a rate that they cannot come remotely close to replenishing, and especially in certain things like 3,800 tanks lost in 3 years of combat, 2,000 BMP-2s alone. This is where we start to see the effects of this. Is how we start to see Russian troops now making before where they'd have massed armor assaults. Now they have assaults with small dismounted platoons or guys literally on e-scooters, motorbikes, in civilian cars heading to the front. These vehicles that are completely either non-existent or completely unsuitable for the sort of operation they're using them for, and that as a result means that Russia has much higher casualties and also reduced combat capabilities. On the Ukrainian side, this is all of course also a major issue, especially given that Ukraine has so much fewer of the material stocks than Russia does. But it's also very much tapered by the fact that Ukraine is conducting far fewer offensive operations than Russia, which is where the sort of heavy equipment is far more necessary in order to hold and affect territory and then take territory. For Ukraine, the biggest issues tend to be both the lack of artillery ammunition and now actually increasingly the lack of sufficient air defense and sufficient both systems and equipment for those. I mean, for Ukraine, the use of drones has helped to compensate very heavily for this, which I'll talk about a little bit going forward. But Ukraine tends to be they have fewer systems, and they certainly have lacking capabilities and ammunition for them. But it's not as bad on this front, as important for them as it is for Russia. And so the last couple months, we've seen a couple different changing trends here. The first is that after a couple months of consolidation, Russia has relaunched full-scale offensive, big-time offensive operations in a couple of different directions. Earlier this year, from about February through March, February through April, through the end of April, Russia slowed the pace of its advance. As you can see on the chart here, showing per month since earlier in the war here, with the most recent being May 2025 here. And you can see the couple months preceding that, this is how much territory in square kilometers that Russian forces seize control of in Ukraine per month. And so you can see that there was a big lull, there was a big spike here in late 2024, and then things slowed, and now last month it picked up again quite a bit as Russian forces pressing a couple different areas, one in the middle of Donbass, and they've pushed Ukrainian forces out of their cross-border incursion into Russia at first, and now the Russians are pushing into the Ukrainian oblast of Sumy, which is on the other side of the border there. And the two other things that are worth mentioning over the last month or so is, first off, the scale of Russian drone and missile attacks against Ukrainian cities over the last 4 or 5 weeks, which has been a constant theme throughout the war. But the number of munitions used in these is growing and growing. I mean, the most recent one, there was one in the last week where I think it was something like 450 distinct drones and or missiles were used in these, which was the highest total, single night total used by Russia in one of these assaults by over 100 drones or missiles since the start of the war. So clearly their production capabilities on these are not shrinking, they're only getting much higher. And the second is the sort of the unrestrained operations, or the increasingly unrestrained operations by Ukraine's intelligence services in the rear, within Russia itself. Most notably being the spectacular coordinated attacks on drone attacks on 5 different Russian airfields across Russia a couple days ago. And that included a drone assault on a Russian airbase in Irkutsk Oblast, which is more than 4,000 kilometers from the borders of Ukraine. So pretty spectacular ability for Ukrainian intelligence to pull this stuff off, and a lot indicating that they're going to be they're going to have more similar operations like this coming in the future. And so there are key points to watch in 2025. I mean, yeah, as I've talked about before, recruitment trends are a big one. Will Russia be able to continue recruiting the amount of manpower and gathering the amount of manpower that it needs just via what it's doing presently? Will the increase in salaries be enough? There was also a bump in recruitment for Russian military and people signing up as Trump came to power, because it was assumed that Trump's going to end the war. So there was this phenomenon in Russian society where a lot of people were saying, okay, let's sign up now, get the big signing bonus, and then the war will end shortly. So low risk and high reward for that. And that's something that's a trend that's unlikely to continue going forward here. But also for Ukraine, can Ukraine find a way to entice its younger generation into service? This is a big problem for Ukraine, in that the service in the Ukrainian military for a couple of years now is basically seen as a one-way ticket, and that you go and you're drafted, and once you're taken, you're basically on the front line nonstop until you either, best case scenario, lose a limb or you're killed. And I can attest to that. You go to the front and you talk to these soldiers, and for the last 3 years, their longest official break will have been 3 days where they were able to take off to some city nearby and then come back. And then their longest actual break was when they deserted for 6 months, because people cannot handle 3 straight years of full-scale combat. So the system in the Ukrainian military is people desert all the time, but as long as you come back, eventually it's okay, because that's the informal system that's arisen for people to handle stress. So Ukraine being able to create some sort of system where people will sign up for the military, and they can be shown that there is a life after the military. It's not just sign up and fight till you're dead. It's sign up, do your service, and opportunities afterwards, and then it's something that they can take part as part of a sustainable life. Other trends, the Russian economy. I don't pretend to be someone who's capable of understanding economics, but I know a lot of people who are, and many of them seem to think that this is the year that the Russian economy will really start to overheat. That the central bank governor Nabiullina is a magician, but she can't work magic forever, and that this will be a year where the ability of Russia to both withstand the effects of sanctions and the effects of the war on its economy will start to really come to a head. Drone production figures may be the single most important metric of the war. By most accounts, about 3/4 of all casualties on the front line in Ukraine these days are caused by drones. I mean, it's essentially just a non-stop swarm of drones all across the front line. And increasingly with these fiber optic drones, that have the cable attached to them, so they can't be jammed by electronic countermeasures. And now you've got these images of fields in eastern Ukraine and Donbass just strewn with miles and miles of these cables. So for each side, it's basically they're in this endless arms race to produce as many drones as possible and just saturate the battlefield. So which side can keep up with the other, and will any side get a significant advantage in that? And just as I was talking about before, desertion rates, return to service rates, primarily among Ukrainian soldiers, less so among Russian, but Russian with the idea of still being able to maintain recruitment rates. And then, the last point, I guess, basically covered as well, just again, of recruitment. But yeah, so I hope that gives you a bit better idea of the sort of grinding, brutal battle of attrition that's unfolding in Ukraine and how things have come to this point and where they're at now and what they might look like going forward in the next 6 to 12 months. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. We'll just go, I guess, now to questions, comments. You can talk about these broader issues I highlighted, or questions or comments for Neil as well. Just open the floor.
Where you said that there's an obsession with creating new battalions or new units rather than replenishing old ones. Could you explain why that is, or what is the purpose of that?
Yeah, sure. I realized as I was going through that I didn't quite touch on that. But yeah, this has been one of the issues that among the Ukrainian high command that mid-level officers and rank and file have been complaining about for literally years. So to put it bluntly, Ukrainian leadership, political and military leadership, instead has this sort of obsession with just the number of forces that they have on paper. There's a large, Ukraine has a lot of forward-thinking, NATO-instructed officers. There's also a very large, much larger Soviet-era, Soviet-instructed officer corps in Ukraine, including the present head of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, General Syrskyi, who was a graduate of the Moscow Officers Academy. Same as Valery Gerasimov, the head of the Russian military. And part of this involves having the idea of just liking to look at the new units on paper and basically had the feel-good feeling of seeing that we're thinking that we're increasing our strength by creating new units and having new forces that we can theoretically deploy in different directions, all the while our existing units, even our crack units, get demolished. I mean, there's been a number of cases. I think it's the 42nd Brigade has been was at the tip of the spear for Ukraine in Donbass and in Bakhmut for months and months, and now well over a year and a half now at this point, and went from being one of Ukraine's absolute best, most crack units, just being absolutely devastated because instead of feeding in new recruits to that unit to reinforce their strength and to learn from the experienced commanders there and to actually keep up to both keep up the strength of this very effective unit and integrate the new recruits effectively. Instead, it felt better to create these new units that exist and that you think you can just use in some new offensive or something, but they're ineffective because they don't have combat experienced personnel, and meanwhile your existing units are degrading. And so this has been something that Zelensky is also particularly culpable in, and that Zelensky places a lot of pressure in the military, and Zaluzhny, the previous commander-in-chief, was someone against this, and Zaluzhny was replaced by Syrskyi, who was for it. And it's something that I think is actually being resolved a bit more now. They're starting to stop doing this, but it's been a huge problem and one of the many self-inflicted issues by the Ukrainian high command that you can talk to 5 different Ukrainian soldiers or officers, and 4 of them will tell you about this in much more colorful language than me.
Or we've come across concerning U.S. foreign aid and how this contributes to that fatigue, as I imagine it does.
Yeah, sure. I'd say it contributes a lot less than it would have, had this occurred 3 years ago. Had it occurred shortly after the start of the war, then yeah, it could have been destructive. It could have been disastrous for two related reasons. One, that the percentage of U.S. aid, foreign military aid to Ukraine that was American at that point was far higher than it is now. And secondly, just for morale reasons. But at this point, the Ukrainians are basically dug in, and the mentality is such that that everyone is still remain. Even though you see these surveys in Ukraine that say people increasingly want an end to the fighting, well, the acceptable end for people is still the opposite. It's still a world removed from the only thing that Russia has ever suggested from the start of the war until today, which is give us at least the 4 oblasts, give us half of Ukraine, reduce the armed forces to basically nothing, and give us a veto over Ukrainian foreign policy. So I think it's essentially you could cut way more foreign aid. You could cut all U.S. aid. You could cut half the European aid tomorrow, and the Ukrainians would not get that much closer to actually considering the terms that Russia is putting forward at this point. And yeah, the equivalent was basically the reaction was Ukraine. I think has mostly been people are frustrated and annoyed, but also figured that something like this would probably happen eventually, and either Europe would lose the stomach to fight, or their Western allies would get bored eventually and stop battling them out, and that they are now themselves more prepared to do more with less than they were 3 years ago. So no one's happy with it, but I don't think it has a huge effect on people.
I just wanted to follow up on that because with a student of mine at Carleton, we Zoomed with a couple of Ukrainian soldiers. This was during the campaign, and they asked us if we preferred Trump or Harris. And so we asked them. One of the soldiers said he preferred Harris, and the other one said he preferred Trump. And the reason he preferred Trump was that if he assumed that Harris was going to be kind of a continuation of Biden, they would get foreign aid after they really needed it. And it was very inconsistent, and they felt that the U.S. was an unreliable partner. I mean, they would come through, but not in the way that the Ukrainians really wanted them to. And with Trump, maybe you'd find out one way or another what was going to happen. Right? And they were kind of ready for that, I think, in the end. So I think that goes to your point that they know they can't rely. They knew they couldn't rely on the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's some articles out there talking about how this was the Zelensky administration's, their own calculation was that they preferred a Trump victory because they felt that Harris would just continue the Biden policies of, enough to fight but not enough to win, versus Trump was the wild card. He could pull it all out, or he could get super upset at the Russians and give them everything.
Power criteria that you referred in one of the reasons about the exhaustion, and how would you say that? How would you assess the different approaches to mobilizing the manpower? Reflects on the broader strategies for Russia and Ukraine, and how would you assess the reliability of foreign fighters as the long-term winning key point, for example, for Russia and Ukraine?
Okay, first part about the recruitment strategy in each country and what they reflect. I mean, for Ukraine, the entire willingness to draft the 18 to 25-year-old cohort has been predicated on the fact that we don't want to sacrifice the nation's future, and that age cohort is already so small because that is the one that those are people who were born in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union, when economic conditions were brutal and no one was having children. So they're already such a small cohort, and they don't want to drain that even more. The downside of that is that all wars in history are fought by 18 and 19-year-olds, and if you're not using because they're the healthiest and the most able to learn, and if you're not using them, then you end up using 45 and 55-year-olds with chronic health conditions. So it's understandable, but at the same time, there's a lot of pushback within Ukrainian military, especially against this strategy. For Russia, it's more so. Russia has sought to make they've sought for the last 2.5 years since fall 2022 to do it largely on a volunteer basis, so a contract basis, with certain some quotas in some regions, but at a low level, nothing to the degree of like a full-scale or probably large-scale mobilization like they had in late 2022. And this is, largely for ideas of keeping the war sort of far away from everyone's mind. So the people who are living in Moscow, people living in St. Petersburg, it's still largely life as before, and the war is something that happens that doesn't affect them. That's far away and is happening to other sorts of Russians, other sorts of people, and not impeding on the stability of their lives. And then with regards to foreign fighters, they're a nice supplement for both sides for sure. It's definitely nice for Russians to get a whole bunch of North Korean troops to conduct assaults instead of them. It's also, both sides have decently highly trained either volunteers or mercenaries with them as well. But in terms of overall numbers, these are still so small compared to the total force structures. The North Koreans are one difference, but there's tens of thousands of those, but those are only used in Kursk, and it doesn't look like they're going to be used inside the boundaries of Ukraine itself. So that's sort of a different and one-off scenario. So the presence of foreign fighters on each side is definitely helpful. I think probably more of a boon to Ukraine, given that Ukraine has quite a few, including quite a lot of Georgian fighters there that are quite effective and motivated and skilled, more so than the Russians do. But it's not enough it's still a pretty small factor in the overall scheme of things.
Thank you.
So I just want to follow up, so I'm interested again in the 18 to 25 votes, what the domestic discourse is in either when you talk to the troops who are there on the ground, or when you talk to Ukrainians more generally. Is this something that many Ukrainians think has to happen, or is there really a sense that, again, sort of sacrificing our future, as you mentioned? How does it play out?
If you talk to Ukrainian soldiers who are out there on the front, absolutely there's a sense that there's increasingly, I'm not sure quite how, I don't want to completely generalize on it, but there's definitely a sense among people I know where, it was years ago, near the start of the war, they were, very high up on it, and they were very proud to be serving, and they were very proud of how the nation was rallying together. And then I see them on social media now, these same Ukrainian soldiers who are still fighting, posting, saying, guys, it's not enough to sit at home and post likes and post Slav Ukraini online. You got to sign up. If you want to actually do something, you want there to actually be Ukraine, choose which brigade you want to go to before it gets chosen for you, and go to the training, sign up, and come out here with us, because we're out here and there's not enough of us and we can't do it alone forever. And on the one hand, I can understand, if I was a 19-year-old Ukrainian guy, I would not want to be joining the infantry either. But on the other hand, Ukraine has had a huge manpower deficit for years, and there's a political unwillingness to fix it at the top. And so, you do see in other parts of it, in the Ukrainian military at least, you definitely see a frustration with this.
Hello, Neil. And most precisely, its use of disinformation in conducting the war. So, as you said and also showed during the presentation, the reality of Russia's advancements during the war and the public feeling about it is very different from each other. Even to the point that the reality is different, and at some point US President Donald Trump was saying that half of the Ukraine is taken by Russia, when in reality the advancement was like 0.7% or something like that. So we can clearly say that Ukraine is losing to Russia an informative war. So how do you think that Ukraine can tackle this kind of problem and in the long term?
Good question. How does anyone? I don't know if anyone in the West knows how to tackle this long term, because it seems to be such an endless and overriding issue with social media and podcasts and your Joe Rogan Tucker Carlsonification of the media space is definitely is an issue. It seems to there seems to be just this, everyone seems to have an inherent amount of contrarian, so many people seem to have an inherent amount of contrarianness that they're willing to just believe that whatever's mainstream is nonsense and the other side must be right. But I don't really have any idea how anyone's supposed to address that. I mean, I think the Ukrainians are being smart about it as they can, or at least in terms of public messaging showing that we're willing to work for, Trump says there has to be peace, we're willing to work for peace, and then clearly demonstrating that it's the Russians that aren't willing to budge on anything and aren't willing to negotiate properly. But in terms of countering this sort of messaging, people who paid a lot more than me don't know the answers to this, so I certainly don't know.
We're reading an article this morning in The Economist that Russians just hit their millionth casualty, and I'm wondering if, I mean, I don't know if anyone can really speak to this, if the public in Russia will start to be, maybe protest that, or if you have any thoughts on that at all.
I mean, you had a lot of protests, and you had actually, contrary to what a lot of people, what popular images, there have been a lot of protests in Russia earlier in the 2000s, throughout the 2010s, and then at the start of the war, you know, there was a lot, and then in late 2022 during mobilization, there was a lot more too. But the state has just so effectively dismantled any apparatus that anyone could use to make a protest, and arrested or driven into exile all the civil society organizations, all the leadership of all the opposition activists. You're operating in a space now in Russia where if you text someone about something like this, let's go make a protest, you can, or you make a post on Facebook about it, you can get 15 years in prison. So, I mean, you do get protests like soldiers' mothers protesting in various villages and things like that. But they're often, even those are oftentimes happening in a scenario where it's the sort of the way that they know that the regime will both approve it, and then they might actually get results from them, you know, appealing to Putin to solve this problem or to return these people, provide answers on these specific people. Because there just is no space for, I mean, it's been so systematically crushed in Russia over the space of 10 and especially the last 5 years. Really since like the late 2020, late 2021, I forget which, when they just crushed all the remaining civil society and opposition media outlets. That it's been done so effectively that, you know, it's hard to even imagine how a large-scale protest takes place. It would have to be some other big event, you know. But again, there have to be something like mobilization that leads to, you know, something spontaneously, which is not. But again, this is the sort of thing that happens all over the place. I mean, like here as well, you know. People tried to organize, the opposition tried to organize protests right after the election last fall. Nothing happened until the regime made a mistake and announced we're ceasing our EU accession process, and then everyone exploded on the streets everywhere. So a lot of these, it's going to take something bigger and more structural to happen, rather than just like this consistent, slow pitter-patter of the war.
To follow up on that too, one thing, you mentioned the soldiers' mothers, which of course in Afghanistan had a huge effect, and I think the anxiety over that was such that not only do you have these this huge crackdown, but there's massive, you mentioned the massive salaries, there's also massive death benefits. So soldiers who are killed, their families get a huge amount of money. And as a result, listening to some of these sort of smaller towns where these soldiers have been drafted, there's these massive construction booms going on now, because families get all this money, they renovate their apartment, or they buy a house, or there's enough money to do that. So it's actually changing the sort of village economies, and in a very odd way. And the hyper-patriotism that's going on, I think, too, has become effective. And I don't know, maybe no more than sort of edging into our talk tomorrow. This kind of populist wave. It's not just Russian, right? Where you have this sort of patriotic wave as well that they've carried on quite effectively too. I don't know in Ukraine, maybe I'll just follow up in terms of Zelensky's position in Ukraine over the last 6 months, since the Trump administration. It's always been a bit in a way, sort of a shaped ground that he's on? Have you seen that change at all in the last while?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a similar thing to what we had in Canada because of the same person, where we saw the Liberals turn around a 20-point deficit in the polls. But again, with Zelensky, yeah, I mean, I think, whereas his approval ratings had fallen from astronomically high at the start of the invasion, then fell, and a lot of criticism of him. But I think just about everyone was happy with how he handled this series of events, or at least I felt that he stood up for Ukraine's interests and did a respectable job at representing Ukraine. So it definitely gave him a boost domestically.
Presentation, and my question is related to more Canada than Ukraine. You have a new prime minister in Canada, the same party but prime minister in you. What is Canada's approach right now towards Ukraine? Canada has always been a very strong supporter, but how does the new prime minister, your support increases or decreases, or what is the approach of Canada to this conflict right now?
I honestly have no idea, Jeff.
It's been out of I'll take that one. It's an interesting question. I think the verbal commitment is there to Ukraine. And on the one hand, it's clear that Canadian defense spending is going to increase. But the interests now are focused much more on, first of all, defending our territory from who knows what the Trump administration might do, and focused on our defense as well. And we'll hear about that a bit tomorrow. So Canada's never had a lot to contribute to Ukraine militarily. So this is, we've had discussions. I've brought together some of my colleagues from National Defense and Global Affairs with some of my Ukrainian diaspora students, and they say, well, why isn't Canada sending weapons to Ukraine? In fact, Canada doesn't make weapons. So the weapons that we're sending to Ukraine, we have to buy from somewhere else, from Europe or the United States. And in the longer term, with the new prime minister, it looks like we'll be investing pretty heavily in defense spending, particularly our own weapons production. But that's going to take years to come online. And then there was a question to why Canada could then commit hundreds of millions of dollars to reconstructing Ukraine in the eastern quadrant and sort of east areas where on the borders where it looks like Ukraine might still hold after any kind of peace settlement. But our Canadian officials were saying, look, if we want to spend, quite frankly, off the record, they said, sort of hundreds of millions of dollars on territory in eastern Ukraine that the Russians could rule into next year or 2 years after a peace settlement would take. So their solution had been, in fact, before last year, was to try and bring in many Ukrainian students to come and study in Canada and to learn the skills necessary to learn. But now there's been a backlash against foreign student numbers in Canada because we have a housing crisis. So that's not working necessarily as well as a policy. So Canada's a bit adrift in terms of the way that it's handling the Ukrainian file right now. So we have discursive support for Ukraine. There's sort of small pots of money that we're giving. We're continuing the Trudeau levels of support towards Ukraine, but there's not really a plan. We have this brigade in Latvia that's present there now as part of our NATO commitment, but there hasn't really been much beyond that the government has made any strides towards. It's not particularly high priority given the Trump threats to Canada. So longer term, yes, we'll be increasing defense spending, and that may have some knockoff effects, but short term, I don't think that we'll be able to see much foreign support, and I don't know, I just don't think we have the capabilities to do very much there. I think longer term, we have strengths in demining, strengthen agricultural production, which may be able to handle once there will be a peace settlement. But right now, it's very difficult to see what Canada can. It's a testament to how little we have independently in terms of defense, trying to address many years too late, I would say as well. I don't know if any of my other colleagues. Neil, go ahead.
Yeah, do you mind if I add?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so, I mean, everything Jeff said is totally true, but we don't really have a military. But we are invited, we have a G7 meeting in Alberta, and our Prime Minister invited Zelensky to the G7 meeting, which is sort of unprecedented and also sort of sends a signal to Donald Trump, who's also going to be there as well. And we also are, or Mark Carney has signaled that he's willing to join the coalition of the willing that Sir Keir Starmer has put forward to put peacekeeping troops in Ukraine, which probably won't happen, but as well as wanting to join the Rearm Europe initiative, which is also totally unprecedented for Canada because it's like signaling us moving away from the military, the American military, because well, they're threatening to annex us, and as well as we may not be buying their planes, their military planes anymore. So there's kind of a shift where Canada might be more realigning with the European military instead of the American one, at least in lip service. So we'll see what happens.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, let's take our coffee break then. We'll come back at 4 p.m. for our next panel on the Black Sea and Caspian Sea regions and their impact on European security market.
Hello and welcome. Today's panel discussion titled The Black Sea and Caspian Sea regions and their impact on European security architecture. The Black Sea and Caspian Sea regions have always held significant strategic importance. Actually, during the Soviet period, Caspian Sea was divided between two countries. It was the Soviet Union and Iran. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, four new countries emerged. We have 5 coastal countries in Caspian, which are Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Russia, and Iran. In the middle, Black Sea was divided between Soviet Union, Turkey, a NATO member, Romania, and Bulgaria. At that time, Romania and Bulgaria were under Soviet control or under Soviet influence. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, new countries emerged like Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova. Romania and Bulgaria joined NATO. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the geopolitical situation in both regions dramatically changed, especially in the Black Sea region, because before Soviet Union was one of the biggest power, after one of the biggest power in that region, or the biggest power, let's say. But now position of Russia is weakened, and NATO countries are much stronger in that region. I cannot say the same in Caspian region, because Russia still is quite influential in that region. Black and Caspian Sea region serves as a bridge between the European Union and energy-rich Central Asia, and also it serves as an alternative energy source and alternative energy route for the European Union, which gives multiple significance to this region. Recently, European Union announced the initiative that it's becoming officially it's becoming a sphere of their interest and their strategic interest, and are planning to increase their economic and political relations with the South Caucasus countries and the Central Asian countries. To discuss these issues related to those two regions and the European Union and the relations between them on their impact on EU's foreign policy, EU's strategy and EU's energy security and in general security, we invited excellent experts, one of the best experts in our country, I would say. Let me introduce them. Our first speaker is Ambassador Gigi Gigiadze, a distinguished career diplomat with more than 2 decades of experience in Georgia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He currently serves as a senior fellow at the Economic Policy Research Center. Ambassador Gigiadze holds a master's degree in international relations from Tbilisi State University and also studied in Germany at the University of Hamburg as an Alfred Turfer student scholar. Over the years, he has held several senior positions, including Deputy Foreign Minister of Georgia, where he was responsible for relations with neighboring countries, the European Union, and served as Georgia's chief negotiator on the EU visa liberalization action plan. Most recently, he served as Georgia's ambassador to the Kingdom of Denmark and the Republic of Iceland. And our next speaker is George Melashvili, the founder and president of the Europe-Georgia Institute. Under his leadership, what began as a student initiative has grown into a leading NGO focused on democratic reform and international security. George holds a bachelor's degree in international relations from the Free University of Tbilisi and a master's in diplomacy and international politics from Tbilisi State University. He has further strengthened his experience through specialized training in strategic political communication in the Theodore Heuss International Academy for Leadership, the National Defense University in Taipei, and program at Haifa University, and the Swedish Institute's Summer Academy for Young Professionals. Last but not least, our final speaker is Dr. Zurab Batiashvili. Dr. Batiashvili is distinguished expert in international relations and national security with extensive experience in service and policy analysis. He has held various positions in the Secretariat of the Parliament of Georgia, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including serving as a consul at the Georgian Embassy in Turkey, and later in the State Security and Crisis Management Council, where he was Deputy Director of the Department of External Security. Since 2018, Dr. Batiashvili has been a research fellow at the Georgian Foundation for Strategic and International Studies, focusing on Middle East-related issues. He holds a doctoral degree from Tbilisi State University and studied Middle Eastern Studies and International Relations at the Tbilisi Institute of Asia and Africa. Please join me to welcome our speakers. Each speaker has 15 minutes for the presentation, and then audience will have the opportunity to ask questions. I will ask Gigi to start this presentation.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure and honor always to be here. At the Free University, we are really meeting each other in a very important time for our country, for Georgia, and for the region at large. I'm very happy that this kind of free discussions are still taking place in Georgia, because the democracy is shrinking in our country. Unfortunately, we are experiencing results of the ongoing hybrid warfare from Russia, which no one knows how will end. We are currently living in a country which is closing itself from the West, distancing itself from the West, and disrupting and cutting its ties with the European Union and NATO. I would like, with your permission, thank you, Sandro. First of all, thank you very much for this very comprehensive introduction and all the details about our biographies. It's it has been a long time in my life, almost 24 years as a Georgian diplomat. I was serving my country. I was serving the purpose, the main purpose of this country, to join European Union and NATO. We had the huge dream, I would say, ambition to one day to become the full-fledged members of both organizations, but since approximately 13 years, the situation is dramatically changed. But while speaking, with your permission, I would focus on the Black Sea region and Black Sea security. Reality, unfortunately, the security in that region has been compromised long ago. We need to maybe remember the first foreign target of Russia in that region was Georgia in 2008, when Russia militarily invaded and occupied Georgia's territories. Almost 20% of our territories still continue to be under Russian occupation, but Russia had a very clear vision with regard to the Black Sea. region, Russia used actually this vacuum which was developing from the West in this part of the world, and decided to act in case of Georgia. It's very important to remember Georgia, because actually from everything what we are witnessing right now has started with Georgia. The response which Russia experienced after Georgia's invasion was very weak. Russia understood how to deal with the West, what to do in order to become to have this impunity in the future and utilize all the existing tools to continue its advance towards other regional countries. So the Black Sea region has been in interest of big powers in our neighborhood, Russia, Turkey, and after the invasion of Georgia in 2008, Russia has started to build up its military presence in the Black Sea area, and met absolutely no resistance, to be very frank. Georgia was alarming the international community before 2008 invasion, and afterwards that Russia was step by step increasing its military presence and its military coverage of the Black Sea. They were slowly stepping in and informing all the littoral states that, creating an impression that as if the Black Sea would be only the Russian backyard lake or Russian sphere of influence. It lasted until very recently, until 2022, when Russia decided to directly military invade Ukraine and to start a full-fledged military confrontation on the European continent. But before that, I would like to tell you that there was a huge disbelief in the West what is going on in our region. We, as I mentioned, we were alarming our Western friends. We were telling everyone that Russia is preparing, Russia is building up, Russia is trying to impose its power, Russia is trying to attack us in the first place. We knew all the information, we had information about what was about to happen and how Russia was going to accomplish all this, but there was a huge disbelief. It was added also with the lack of concrete policy. And what Sandro mentioned right now, the special strategy of the European Union or special approach of the NATO, those are the most recent developments in both organizations, because until that time there was absolutely no clear vision with regard to the Black Sea, with regard to the Black Sea region and how to deal with us, with the countries of the Black Sea. So it was given up or left for Russia mainly to deal with it, which in our understanding was a big, huge mistake. We need to keep in mind that Black Sea has never stopped to be the NATO and EU sea at the same time. It is the three members of the Black Sea region are the NATO countries, and two of them are the EU NATO countries. So, notwithstanding of this reality, Russia was given the free hand to act as if nothing was possible here. After 2008 military invasion, for the second time, there was an initiative coming this time from Russia to create so-called the regional security architecture. And I'm speaking now about the 3+3 format. I don't know if you have heard about it, but this time this initiative was coming from Russia, and they were trying to impose this artificial security architecture on the region, telling that these countries of the Black Sea can deal with the security situation in this region on their own, themselves, and literally telling everyone that you should keep away from us. The West should keep away from this part of the Europe, and we will find the common language with all the countries involved. Unfortunately, of course, this time yet Georgia has not agreed to be part of this 3+3 architecture. It came first from Turkey 2008, then after the Russian invasion into Georgia, it was called a different name. It was the regional platform at that time, but it was also the same meaning, to have these three big countries like Russia, Turkey and Iran, together with three remaining smaller countries, Georgia, Azerbaijan and Armenia, to have this closer format and to deal with all the necessities between ourselves. At that time, situation was refused. I mean, this offer was refused by Azerbaijan as well. So Turkey could not persuade at that time Azerbaijan to join this format. But in 2022, mainly 21, this format was completed with Azerbaijan. So we have all 5 countries in favor of it, but not Georgia. Understandably, to understand why was there such a big resistance in the Georgian foreign policy, in the Georgian thinking of it, Georgia has developed itself as the most pro-European, as the most Western-leaning country. Georgia used to be the most trusted country in the region until very recently. And I'm telling you the reality until very recently, and I will touch upon this issue as well. So Georgia, of course, could not imagine itself to be cut from the West, to be cut from the European Union, to be cut from the NATO, and to be closed in this format where, of course, Georgia wouldn't have any say. There is also a very important fact that from the Russian perspective, there is unfortunately not a 3+3 in that region, but Russia has not only occupied Georgian territories, but also has recognized them as independent states. You know that those are the Abkhazia and Sinhala region, South Ossetia. Russia sees on the Georgian territory actually 3 independent states. So this was, of course, done from Russia with the idea that in the future of those quasi non-recognized, only from Russia recognized quasi-states could join this so-called format of 3+3. It could be enlarged in something else. So it was very clear for everyone in Georgia that this was a threat, and we couldn't agree to move in that threat on our own. Unfortunately, the situation in Georgia is changing very quickly, as I already mentioned. We see that increasingly this so-called government, I will call them de facto government of Georgia, is willing to accept everything what is coming from Russia, is ready to please Russian interests in the region as much as possible, and we are already aware that even this kind of so-called format 3+3 might be acceptable for the political party Georgian Dream in the nearest possible future, because there is also no resistance in this offer or in the thinking or consideration. That we see no free expression on that. We see no resistance. We see no refusal of such kind of format. So therefore, we think that in the nearest possible future, this government, the so-called government, will support the joining of Georgia to this format. At the same time, we need to take into consideration as well that Georgia is hosting very important pipelines, energy pipelines, coming from Azerbaijan, coming from the Central Asia, via Georgia to Turkey, and then further to Europe. So this part of the Eastern Europe is very important for the European Union, and the European Union has already extended its hand on different occasions and very clearly stated that it has interest in deepening the relations with Georgia in terms of connectivity, in terms of energy, in terms of creating this alternative source of energy transportation, and creating some kind of new possibilities for the European Union and the Central Asian countries, while avoiding Russia and avoiding all this difficult country in the future. Unfortunately, this gap is also getting narrower. We see that all these initiatives coming from the European Union are met with huge resistance by the ruling party in Georgia. We do not have any proper development on our path towards Georgia's further integration with the European Union, not to mention at all the NATO, because since they came to power in 2012, NATO has slowly but gradually disappeared from the agenda at all. There is absolutely no mentioning of NATO in any kind of formats. We had the only light in this tunnel was of course the European Union. We were hoping that this policy of, how can I describe it, pleasing Russia but at the same time doing something better for our country could work out at the end, and they at least would be able to use this window of opportunity which has opened for Georgia after the tragic events in Ukraine, but unfortunately it has not realized itself. Since 2023, the Georgian Green refused to fulfill the minimal requirements of the European Union. Those were the 12 recommendations. They have started the full-fledged Russian propaganda, I mean literally Russian propaganda against the West and against the European Union, engaged in the anti-Western rhetoric, and in 2024 they were nevertheless given the chance, not they, but actually the Georgian population was given the possibility to have this candidacy status together with Ukraine and Moldova, and they even lost and they're losing this opportunity. I don't see in the nearest possible future that there will be any development. In that regard, they refused to fulfill these 9 steps stipulated by the European Commission, and now we are in a situation when Georgia is slowly sliding into limbo, when we will be not together with our traditional partners like Ukraine and Moldova, nor will we be in the evergreen candidate countries, together with evergreen candidate countries like Turkey and others. There is some special place for Georgia, in my understanding, which will be very, very soon forgotten, and Georgia will be most probably losing all the benefits which we had throughout the last 30, I would say 34 years since the gaining of our independence, which is very unfortunate development. I would like to once again raise our understanding, I mean the understanding of the people who are thinking about how it should look like, the Black Sea security. We think that without Georgia's involvement, without free and democratic Georgia, it will be absolutely impossible to guarantee, to ensure security in this part of the world. Georgia was declaring at numerous occasions that we were ready to participate in any security policy architecture proposals coming from the European Union or coming from NATO. And as you might be aware, Georgia was one of the most trusted partners of both organizations. We were standing with NATO in Afghanistan, in ISAF and post-ISAF missions. We were standing with the European Union in the training and military missions everywhere. Unfortunately, this all accumulated trust has been dismantled and has been evaporated during the last several years. But nevertheless, in order to guarantee the security in the Black Sea, there will be incremental, there will be very much important to have Georgia on board, to have free, democratic, and pro-Western Georgia on board. And I very much hope that the same understanding also exists in the European Union and in the West in general. This was very brief what I wanted to say. Thank you. I'll be very happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gigi, for an excellent overview of the Black Sea security. Since the conference is titled as the effects of the Russia-Ukraine war on international security, I will try to focus on this topic as well. First of all of us need to realize that there is no such thing as European security architecture. There is a European pillar of transatlantic security architecture that has been created by the United States since the World War II. Then we had some changes after the unification of Germany, after the end of the Cold War, but eventually the understanding has not changed. It has still been European theater of transatlantic security architecture. And that's a very big problem, because the world has changed since the Cold War, and the European Union now has to take care of its own security, especially on the eastern flank. That did not happen. Together with more and more disengagement from the United States, we're witnessing a drastic impreparation of European countries towards the challenges that we're facing. Because right now, we have at least 3 different aspects or theaters of European security. It is the Black Sea, it is the Eastern Front of Ukraine, it is the Arctic, and also it is the Western Balkans. All of these challenges, although geographically some of these regions are not connected, all of them are connected when it comes to the challenge itself. Because whether we're talking about the Arctic, whether we're talking about the Western Balkans, whether we're talking about the Black Sea, the malign actors, the axis is almost identical. In the Western Balkans, Russia is pouring lots and lots of money into propaganda and misinformation activities, and they're enjoying immense support from the local regimes. Whether it is Vučić in Serbia, whether it is the Republika Srpska in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and other local actors as well. For example, in Černogoria or Montenegro, it is the local Orthodox Church, which is the biggest influencer of and transmitter of Russian narratives into the country. When we're talking about the Arctic, the challenge is also almost the same. Russia and China are cooperating on a number of issues, and what we're witnessing right now is a joint modus of operation between China and Russia, not only in the Arctic, but also in Central Asia, where they're also cooperating on lots of different issues. And also Georgia is a very good example of this Chinese-Russian modus of cooperation, because while the Russians are focusing on hard power and also on coercing the Georgian government into the creation of a pro-Russian quasi-state similar to Belarus here, the Chinese are mostly focusing on economics. For example, one of Georgia's biggest banks responsible for pensions, which is delivering pensions to the people, was yesterday purchased by the biggest Chinese conglomerate in Georgia, the Huali Group. So this modus of operation between China and Russia is something that we're witnessing right now. And if we also add another part of this axis, Iran, then we're also witnessing contributions from Iran in Georgia as well. Because, for example, when there was this horrific terrorist attack of Hamas on Israel in October last year, it was exactly Iranian-funded mosques in Georgia's Azerbaijani-populated Konkan region that were preaching in support of Hamas actions in Georgia. So we're witnessing lots of different cooperation between different actors in the Caucasus. And the biggest challenge here is that this has been going on for a very, very long time. The problem is that the West, in general, has not been noticing the great game that has been going on without the West participation. And that probably is the funniest part here, because while Russia and China and Iran were preparing, cooperating, building structures against each other, in cooperation with each other against the West was largely not involved in it and preoccupied with lots of different topics, whether internal or external. And while these internal discussions usually originated from the West itself, the moral relativism was very strongly supported by Russia and relatively later by China as well. Russian Federation and their predecessors, the Soviet Union, they have always invested lots of money into propaganda, misinformation, strengthening communist, socialist cells in lots of European and North American countries. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a time when Russia did not have enough money to do it, so most of these cells were operating on its own. But then, probably somewhere around 2003, 2004, Russia decided to invest not only into the communist and socialist cells, but also into extreme right, and also into general division. Social media came at a great assistance at that period of time, because if in the past you needed some mediums to communicate your messages to the West, so that you would be able to split the countries, to decrease resilience, now you could do it using a troll farm in St. Petersburg. And we know that, for example, Prigozhin, who was recently blown up in air of Russia, who was largely responsible for lots of these operations, and his career began as a troll lord somewhere in St. Petersburg. And then he created his mercenary company, and then he went to fight in Ukraine. But he originated as a troll farm leader somewhere in St. Petersburg. So it turned out that while the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians were utilizing all sorts of military-scale propaganda. The West was largely unprepared and didn't know that any of it was actually happening. The first reactions that we have seen from the United States, from the European Commission, most of them coincided with Hillary Clinton's loss in the election, when the Democratic Party in the US realized that there might have been some foreign interference. But right now, most of the actions and activities that were implemented by the Democrats were eliminated under the reasoning of free speech and civilism, which in itself is a very good topic. Unfortunately, we cannot discuss it right now, but that was also a very important thing to consider. Now, to go back to the region, in Georgia, we witnessed all of it in 2008. Very often, we like to say that Georgia is a sandbox of Russia's tactics against the West, and this sandbox has been used for a very long time. The invasion in 2008 was not only a military invasion. The Russians have been active militarily, utilizing hard power in Georgia for a very long time. They have been using military groups in Abkhazia, in Sahadeo. They instigated the civil war in Tbilisi, so they have always been trying to use military assets in this country. However, what was very interesting in 2008 was a huge propaganda campaign against Georgia. Blaming Georgia that we started the war in 2008, blaming Georgia's former president that he was a Nazi. I mean, if you look a little bit forward, all of these blames, all of this propaganda.
Ask Zurab, start his presentation.
Hi everyone, thank you for this opportunity. The topic of my speech is Turkey's role in the confrontation between Russia and Ukraine in the Black Sea region. For Turkey, the Black Sea was associated with the Soviet threat during the Cold War, and in this regard, a joint Turkish-American policy of containment was pursued. After the collapse of the Soviet Union and subsequent pursuit of a more independent foreign policy by Turkey, Ankara radically changed its perception of threats. It can be said that the interests of the West and Turkey in the Black Sea sometimes not only fail to collide, but in many cases contradict each other. In addition to its emotional connection to the Black Sea region, and to the sea itself, once known as the Ottoman Lake, Turkey has the longest coastline on the sea, and most importantly, controls the gateway connected to the Black Sea to the outside world. This puts Ankara in a unique position in relations to the Black Sea and the Black Sea region. At this stage, we can identify two main issues that are important for the better understanding of Turkey's perspective on Black Sea security. The first is Turkey and the Monroe Convention. The Monroe Convention was the regime of the trade signed on July 20, 1936, confirms Turkey's control of the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits. This issue is Ankara stands at the level of recognition of sovereignty. Therefore, adhering to its terms is always a sensitive point for Turkey. The second issue is Turkish-Russian relations in the Black Sea. Also, Turkey and Russia often cooperate on various issues. These ties are still tactical rather than strategic. The reason is simple. Ankara and Moscow have different long-term goals that contradict each other's interests. The main point of contention between Russia and Turkey in the Black Sea is indistinguishably by Crimea Peninsula, which Moscow considers its own territory, while Turkey views it as part of Ukraine. Turkey rightly believes that the rights of the Crimean Tatars, who are historically, linguistically, and culturally close to them, will be protected precisely under the Ukraine state. At the same time, the Russia-Ukraine war is affecting both Turkey's economy and its security environment. On the other hand, Turkey supports Ukraine's territorial integrity and supplies it with arms, but on the other, it needs to maintain close trade and economic ties with Russia, especially in light of the difficulties the Turkish economy has been facing now. Naturally, Ankara has its own national interests to actively pursue in the international arena. We will try to shed light on these interests as it will help us to better understand Ankara's motivations behind its decision making. For Turkey, as an engaged foreign political actor, several factors are important in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. First, to prevent Russia strengthening itself in the former Soviet space, especially in the Black Sea region. After the annexation of Crimea and start of full-scale war against Ukraine by Russia on February 24, 2022, the balance of power on the Black Sea has changed unfavorably for Turkey. At the beginning of the war, there was threat of the former Soviet space returning into Moscow's sphere of influence, and therefore Ankara supported and still supports Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, as well as Georgia's accession to NATO. Within this positioning, Ankara has been and still is supplying the necessary armament to Ukraine so that it can deal with Russian aggression. Also, due political considerations, Ukrainians are not vocal about the successful use of Bayraktars or other instruments at the stage of the war. On March 1st, 2022, 1 week after the start of the war, following the Montreal Convention, Ankara closed the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Strait to warships, thereby preventing a group of Russian warships from crossing the Mediterranean Sea, entering the Black Sea, and reinforcing Russian naval attacks against Ukraine, especially against Odessa at this stage. The second, maintain deepened trade and economic ties with Russia and Ukraine. Over the years, Ankara has enjoyed close trade and economic relations with both Ukraine and the Russian Federation. This is vital to Turkey's troubled economy, which faces serious challenges. The official inflation rate has risen. The devaluation of the Turkish lira continues. The purchasing power of citizens is falling. The internal and external debts of the country is growing, and foreign investments are leaking out of the country. Third, to get as much political benefits as possible from the weakened Russia, especially in those regions where Moscow and Ankara have opposing interests. With the Russia-Ukraine war, Russia's military political influence has decreased throughout the world, including in those regions where Russia and Turkey have opposing interests. The clearest example of this is Turkey's ally, Azerbaijan, establishing control over the Latin corridor, which connects Armenia to Karabakh in August 2022, and which was controlled by Russian so-called peacekeeping forces in the previous years. mainly because of this preoccupation, which the war in Ukraine, Russia was unable to save its ally, the Assad regime in Syria, which fell in the fall of 2024, leaving pro-Turkish forces in power in Syria. Fourth, to increase the role of Turkey as an important foreign political actor and mediator, Ankara, using its special relations with Russia and Ukraine as well as its important geopolitical location, tries to act as a mediator between Moscow and Kiev. Turkey is ideally placed to hold talks between the parties. During the war, Russian-Ukrainian talks were held in Istanbul and Antalya. On 3rd of May 2025, Turkey proposed hosting a summit with the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and the United States as it tries to broker a deal to end Russia's 3-year invasion. And conclusions. Turkey will continue to support Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty in the future, and it's likely to continue to supply arms to Kiev. Also, at this stage, the war has entered an intense phase, and the possibilities for mediation are now limited. Ankara will continue to try to play the role of mediator between the parties in order to de-escalate the situation. By deepening trade and economic relations with Russia, Turkey is working on a proverbial knife edge. So far, it has been able to avoid secondary sanctions. However, this threat has not been completely removed and will continue to exist in the future in light of heavy sanctions imposed on Russia by the West. Ankara continues to try to take advantage of Russia's military political weakening, not in the South Caucasus, but also in the other regions where Turkish and Russian interests are at odds with each other. For example, Middle East, Central Asia, Libya. Ankara will try to actively participate in the new security architecture that will emerge after the end of the war. For example, Turkey has long been pushing for issue of increasing the number of permanent members of the UN Security Council. After the war, the issue of revising the Montreal Convention, which was signed in 1936, and many also previous provisions no longer meet modern requirements, may also be on the agenda. This convention is important for Turkey because with this agreement, Turkey's sovereignty over the states was finally settled. It is also of vital importance for the security of Georgia because it regulates the terms of entry and possible stay of military ships in the Black Sea belonging to non-Black Sea countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all the interesting presentation. And before we open the floor to the audience, I want to ask one question to all of you. As you know, recently, 1 year ago, I think, you just signed a strategic agreement with China. And a strategic partnership agreement with China. And I'd like to ask you, hear your insights, your opinion. How can it damage Georgia's relationship with EU, or maybe it can help? Please,
Sure.
So you start with that.
Well, the interesting thing about that agreement between Georgia and the People's Republic of China is the fact that it gave Georgia nothing. Literally nothing. It was a very political, locally political decision by the Georgian Queen, which was trying to create the perception among the local public that they were dealing with China, that they were finding new sources of wealth, economics, etc. But if you read this document, it fully accommodates the interests of the People's Republic of China, but it provides nothing to Georgia. Of course, the original aim has slightly changed since that. The new the Georgian Greens government under Prime Minister Latsabidze is looking much more forward to deepen ties with People's Republic of China. We are witnessing that Chinese capitals' activities in Georgia are increasing. We've seen the Anaklia port that has been signed off to the Chinese, but the agreement has not yet been signed, and Georgian Green is still using the issue of Anaklia port, which is a very strategic asset for Georgia, as a bargaining chip with the Trump administration. And also in general, even though this document itself is just a sheet of paper, it sent a very decisive, I would even say, signal to our partners in the EU, in the DC, and also in Brussels. The signal was that if you don't like us, if you don't like our authoritarian turn, if you don't stop teaching and lecturing us on democracy, on human rights, we'll go to China. Whether or not it is adequate or even possible, or, in my opinion at least, it was more of a reroute to go to Moscow through China in Georgian Green's vision of foreign policy, which is itself a big issue. I think it became a very big irritating factor, even to Biden's administration, which was much milder on China than the still new Trump's administration. I don't think that it was a very big challenge to the Europeans, because there are a bunch of European countries, Germany for example, who have even deeper cooperation agreements with the PRC. And also the Europeans, they have been perceiving trade with China as something absolutely adequate and normal. And even the Americans, they were not against Georgia trading with China. For example, Anaklia port was largely supported by the United States. But definitely this demonstrative signature of this agreement was obviously designed as an irritation to DC and to Brussels, and as a warning that if you do not behave, we'll go to China.
Relations between so-called government of Georgia and the West is almost diminished. But of course, this kind of cooperation with China, Iran also, is one of the reasons why everybody acts on the agenda, and I hope that in the near future it will be agreed and it will be
implemented. The most important
implemented. The only reason why it's on the agenda is implementation. So I think that it works, but negatively it works, this kind of cooperation with China.
Just to add a few words, I think this was a very populist step. As we mentioned, Georgia already had the free trade agreement with China, and was one country in the region who had the free trade agreement with China and the European Union at the same time. In my opinion, there's nothing happening between Georgia and China without Russia's permission. So I think Russia green-lighted this kind of development. This is an attempt of again, Russia in Georgia through the Georgian Green to reorientate Georgia from the west to the east, and to do it in a fancy way to claim that they have found even stronger and bigger economic partner, what the current de facto government is successfully doing. This was populism, pure populism, nothing else, and it's noteworthy to mention as well that Georgi has already touched on it. In the strategic partnership agreement, there is no mention of Georgian sovereignty and territorial integrity, so China literally does not mention our sovereignty on our territory, including Abkhazia and Central South Ossetia, and Just a few days ago, there was a vote in the UN regarding the return of refugees, dignified return of Georgian refugees to their home places in Abkhazia and Sahadeo. And China, our strategic partner, abstained from support. So this is, of course, everything is a fake. But most of all, what I think the most important part is that it's of course green-lighted by Russia, and Russia is very much involved in that Georgia develops all kind of developments with the rest of the world, except for the West, European Union, and the other European partners.
Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen. The floor is open for questions, please.
Hello. Well, first of all, thank you for such an insightful presentation. I had a question kind of open to any speaker, because generally the panel is discussing European security architecture and the impacts of what's happening in the Black Sea and Caspian Sea. So I wanted to get your opinion on whether or not the European security architecture at its present state is equipped to effectively tackle, and do they have the resources, the knowledge, the logistical capability? And if not, which I feel there to be some sentiments, what do you think would be the critical areas of improvement that most need to be focused on to improve their ability to address these security issues?
Well, thank you for the question. I think the short answer would be, of course, no. There is absolutely no, the vision is always there, the outlines of the vision are there, but of course there is no proper agenda how they are going to achieve this. And in the current reality, when the war is ongoing in Ukraine, when Russia is still attacking the biggest country of the European continent, and there is occupied regions of Georgia, of course there is less instruments available. But at the same time, it gives them exceptional possibility. I forgot to mention in my initial presentation that Russia is building the naval military base on our occupied territory, Latsabidze, the biggest one on the Black Sea, since it was thrown away from Crimea. It was by the Ukrainian forces, Ukrainian naval forces. Ukraine has no naval military presence in the Black Sea as such. So therefore, the situation is currently very tense, but we should welcome these initial steps which we witnessed, the strategy of the Black Sea, the interest of the Black Sea, the building of resilience of the Black Sea, of course. But at the same time, we need to understand that nothing should be decided in that region without the participation of all the countries. And we are very much willing, when I say we, the Georgian people, would be very much willing to see all Georgia's involvement in that, because we were, again, the first victims of Russia in terms of the territorial aggression and military provocation. But the short answer is no.
Well, the answer to the question is of course no. Also, first of all, we need to actually say what is European security. Do we include Turkey into the European security, or do we not? Because the European Union is very much polarized on this issue, and considering the position of Greece, I'm not exactly sure that any government in essence will be very happy to include Turkey as a part of the European security architecture. Then we have the United Kingdom, which was also a very big question up until now. Now, thanks God, they signed a security defense pact with the European Union, which allows them access to the 150 billion euros, which will be used to foster European security. Third question is the United States of America. Shall we have further involvement of the US in European security in general, or is the United States focusing on East Asia, on the Arctic, and in that case, Europe is even in a worse shape than we can imagine. Germany, which is the locomotive of the European economy, and also Bundeswehr is supposed to be the locomotive of European defense in general, lacks human resources, lacks financing, lacks military tech, and if we compare the military preparedness of Bundeswehr to the end of the Cold War, you will be very surprised with how many military brigades are still operational from that period of time. Second biggest issue we have is probably time. Ukraine won European Union some time to prepare itself. The previous German government, and I'm focusing on Germany because there is worse shape. The previous German government under Bundeskanzler Scholz, they introduced the Zeitenwende, which is a change of times. but it was not implemented. It began, but Merz's government lacked financial resources, I would even say expertise on lots of topics. And now, hopefully, under the new government, under Buddhist Chancellor Merz, we shall be able to see the Zeitenwende actually implemented. And also the question of nuclear umbrella. Is the United States still ready to provide the nuclear umbrella to the NATO member countries or not? Because if not, it means that we have only one European country which is ready to do it and has a capacity. Because again, there are two countries in Europe with nuclear capacity. There is the United Kingdom and France. But the United Kingdom is very much intertwined with the United States of America. So I wouldn't call their nuclear umbrella entirely independent. In case of France, thanks to Charles de Gaulle, we have a different approach towards the news, and French doctrine is very peculiar. But in general, it seems that France was much more prepared thanks to de Gaulle and also to all those pesky French who were always demanding about strategic autonomy from the USA. So it turns out that the French were right in some sense, unfortunately or fortunately. So, yeah, the European Union is not ready. Second, we have the Arctic, where the situation is even worse. We at least have Ukraine when it comes to the eastern flank. And also, again, we have Turkey, and Turkey's military, also fleet, is in relatively good shape. And if you're really interested in the preparedness of European countries, have a look at the fleet of Romania or Bulgaria. The two European countries, EU member countries with direct access to the Black Sea. There is no such thing as Romanian or even Bulgarian as an infinite fleet. So yeah.
Black Sea is becoming less of a strategic gray zone, and in that context, where does this leave Georgia, which remains outside of any collective security structure? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. No, I think on the contrary. I think that as the situation unwraps in Ukraine, and then as we see that Russia is trying to utilize different types of hybrid warfare elements, I think the Black Sea is becoming more and more part of EU's attention, and that this resulted in this new EU Black Sea strategy, which was tabled just 2 weeks ago, maximum. And I don't think that the importance of the Black Sea will diminish. We see that the European Union and partially NATO as well, they're showing much more interest towards this region. But of course, everything will depend on the outcome of the war. Even in the worst possible outcome, Russia will need a lot of time to replenish its military presence on the Black Sea. It has suffered quite substantial damage. I mean, there's casualties on the Black Sea, and it has become very clear that the European Union and NATO need to pay much more attention. With regard to Georgia, it's very unfortunate what we are witnessing, and you are absolutely right. Russia is, as I mentioned, Georgia is being a little bit left behind, but not because of the will or not because of the inaction of the European Union or anyone else, but because of the very purposeful policy of the not pro-Russian government, but Russian, literally Russian government in Georgia. Because pro-Russian it was used to be some years ago. Now we face the absolute compliancy with the Russian policy, and of course they're not interested that Georgia moves ahead with our European Union integration. So the danger is there. I'm from this point of view, I have no idea how it can develop in the nearest possible time. We had the statement of the EU Commissioner for Enlargement just 3 days ago, and the last sentence of the statement was that the door still remains open, and there is still a possibility that Georgia might move on launching the negotiations on our membership. But in the current circumstances, I don't see any possibility that this bunch of people, this political party of Georgian Dream, will somehow fit into that agenda. Thank you very much. A very, very unfortunate prognosis, but this is what it is.
what I can add is that nothing will work without victory of Ukraine, and this outcome is not clear. Many things are clear also.
I definitely agree with both of you. The only thing I want to add is there is a possible scenario for Georgia if situation goes in the worst possible direction. So if Russia gains more and more foothold in Ukraine, it means that the regime in Tbilisi will also align itself more and more and more with Russian Federation. Gigi has already mentioned the 3+3 format, which is prepared for Georgia, and Lavrov is very open that Georgian seat is there, so you can join whenever you want. But that's not the worst possible scenario. There is also another possibility. We call it Bosnian development here, is the creation of a quasi-autonomous confederation between Georgia and the occupied regions of Abkhazia and Tbilisi. For those of you familiar with the Bosnian case, you know that Bosnia and Herzegovina is almost a failed state because of all the bureaucratization of their decision making, and also because part of this confederation is Republika Srpska, which openly aligns itself with Vučić's regime. No decisions can be made about the future of Bosnia and Herzegovina. All of them are vetoed and blocked by one part of that confederation. In Georgian case, we will have not one, but two parts of this possible confederation that will be more than eager to block any decisions on Georgia's future. So that's why the situation in Georgian case is even more dramatic and much more challenging.
First of all, I would like to thank all of you. Traditionally, security and defense have been seen as NATO's core responsibility, while the European Union has been considered the economic union, which was more likely concentrated on the economic integration process. However, since the outbreak of Ukrainian and Russian war in 2022, we have seen the European Union take some novel steps, such as providing lethal aid, also talking about the strategic autonomy discourse and coordinating defensive investment and systems. In your view, has the war fundamentally transformed the European Union's role from predominantly economic union into a politically and security actors? And if so, how sustainable is this transformation? Thank you.
Of course, I think the war has transformed the whole world into the new reality, and we would only welcome the more active role of the European Union, and we hear increasingly about the military security independence of the European Union, since the NATO is becoming, how can I put it correctly, it's experiencing not the best time in its history. We can only welcome that European Union countries, member states, are showing more and more willingness and readiness to support Ukraine by all kind of means, military means, to deter the direct aggression. But everyone in the European Union understands clearly that if Russia will not be stopped in Ukraine, the next countries will be the members of the European Union, and it has been already mentioned on several occasions by Russia as well, the Baltic states, Poland, and so on. So therefore, I think this is very rational, logical development in the current reality, that the European Union shows more willingness to somehow deter the aggression. But with regard to the novelty, I would like to tell you that in 2009, after the Russia's invasion to Ukraine, there was a very strong consideration, I would call it. There was an opinion in the European Union, what can the European Union do in order to safeguard security of the Eastern European countries like Georgia. This thought, unfortunately, was not developed much, and it was transformed in 2009 into Eastern Partnership Initiative. This was a gesture of the European Union to somehow show its willingness to engage with our countries, with 6 countries, more thoroughly, more deeply. But it did not work in the way they hoped for. They thought that if the countries will be more economically
tied to the European Union, more economic relations with the European Union develop, it might be some deterrence for Russia in the future, which was of course very naive to think at that time. Only security military alliances like NATO, in my opinion, can really hold Russia's advance in the future towards any European country, including the EU and NATO member states. But at the same time, I think they need to develop their own security military capabilities. And I'm very much happy with the new German government. The new federal chancellor is quite direct and quite clear about his vision of how the European Union should look like, and it's a long overdue from the Germany's perspective. Everyone in Europe was expecting more active role of Germany. I think this time has come, and the Germany is really able to build up the security pillar in the European Union, much more than any other country, unfortunately. But we have to see. But that would be any logical development, the only logical development to look into that direction. Thank you.
I completely agree with you, but at the same time, I will add that not only a war has changed the European Union, but and the security expectations and views, but also Trump administration also has its role in changing European Union, and the process is on the way. Let's see what will be the result. But I also hope that new government of Germany, especially, and France and United Kingdom, these three will be very active in this new architecture of security.
Let me spice things up a little bit. Gigi, I disagree with you. So, first of all, it was not the Ukraine war itself that changed the perceptions in the European Union. It was a wonderful American politician, Donald J. Trump, and specifically his meeting with Zelensky in the Oval Office. And also the threat of the United States of pulling out of Europe. It was, of course, the biggest awakening call, not only for the European Union, but I believe for Canada as well. So if the European Union manages to become a military defense security actor, I think we should erupt a statue of Donald J. Trump somewhere in Berlin. Let me do this. That's point one where I slightly disagree with you. Second, it was not naivete. It was stupid, wishful, and corrupt thinking on behalf of German political elites, first and foremost. The fact that there was absolutely zero reaction from the West after the war in 2008 when Russia invaded Georgia, that there was very limited reaction from the West when Russia invaded Ukraine, originally annexation of Crimea, the fact that there was very limited reaction in 2014, all of it empowered Russia to behave like it behaves right now. And also, when we're talking about Germany, we should always mention the wonderful, glorious people like Gerhard Schröder, who ended up on the board of directors of Gazprom and was directly involved in probably all the corrupt deals, including Nord Stream 1 and 2, and also Angela Merkel, whose creation was this politics of appeasement. So it was not only naivete. I strongly believe that, at least in case of some European countries, it was also corruption, as Gerhard Schröder demonstrated wonderfully. So I can always bring his example on these topics.
First of all, I want to thank all of you for very interesting and amazing speeches, but my question is directly to Ambassador Gigiadze. As you talked about the hybrid threats during the pipeline project that is conducted in this region, and also you talked about Georgia's role in it and the potential that can be conducted during this process. So my question is, how can the Black Sea and Caspian Sea regions be insulated from hybrid threats that directly target these infrastructure actors, and what kind of cooperation needs to be conducted between you and the regional actors? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will try to plan that I think the Caspian Sea would not be in place without the Black Sea security. Caspian Sea security is very much dependent on the Black Sea security. Right? Caspian Sea is much more, I would call it the next step in that policy of EU. First of all, Georgia has never stopped being a target of the hybrid warfare since the beginning of our independence. We need to recall that 2008 was a culmination, but the instigation of ethnic conflicts has started long ago. It was 1992, 1993, the clashes, the civil wars in Georgia, which were coordinated, which were supported by Russia and the North, from the North Caucasus. While speaking about what can be done from the European perspective, I think European Union needs to call the things the proper names. I mean, we are witnessing already what is going on, and we see much more clear voices coming from the European Union, from the West. But as I said, it's long overdue. I mean, unfortunately, things have reached the point when those voices are coming a little bit late. In Georgia's case, I can't speak with you about other countries. Like we are very much happy to witness how Armenia is developing its relations with the West, European Union. We are at one side, we are very glad that the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is coming to an end, and hopefully there will be a peaceful agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And there is only one country who is against that, and of course it's Russia, because from the Russia's perspective, it says absolutely no. It doesn't matter who is occupying whom. I mean, Zurab mentioned it. If Russia forces Azerbaijan to take over Zangezur or to take some parts of Armenia, then Russia would win, because from Russia's perspective, it's important to have instability in the region. They do not care whose territory is occupied by whom and who is doing what. The main thing is that there is no peaceful agreement. So I very much hope that it will also contribute to that. We didn't mention, by the way, that the Black Sea was important because all the main regional conflicts instigated by Russia all are in the Black Sea or in the very vicinity of the Black Sea. Transnistria, Abkhazia, Tskhinvali region, Nagorno-Karabakh in the new stage, and now Ukraine. All these conflicts, I mean, they are in the Black Sea, and they are conducted by Russia in that area. So, although Black Sea and Caspian Sea are very much connected, I don't think that without ensuring security in the Black Sea, there will be any kind of security guarantees for the Caspian Sea, or it will become somehow more important for the European Union. They need to reach that region by means of Georgia, by means of our countries. And of course, in that geography, Georgia plays the key role. Without Georgia, none of our neighboring countries, I mean Azerbaijan and Armenia, have access to the Black Sea or have access to directly via the Black Sea to the European Union. So therefore, Georgia is the key country for Russia. Therefore, they are now conducting, I think, one of the most successful. It will enter the books, history books, in the years to come. The most successful hybrid operation against the Georgian state by means of Georgians themselves. And what they couldn't achieve in 2008, they are now achieving by the people who agreed to do it on their behalf in our country. So I don't know if I directly answered the question, but security of the other regions of the Caspian region will very much depend on how the situation will develop around the Black Sea region in our country.
Hello. Sorry. I have a question related more to Georgia's relations with the West and the Western response to the last, I guess, let's say 6 months or 1 year here. You hear a lot these days in Georgia that the Georgian people have been abandoned by the West, or that the West is turning a blind eye and needs to support Georgians as they struggle against this oppressive government. but it's never really been clear to me, or I've never seen it much outlined what that means in practice. And so the question is addressed to whoever would wish to answer it, but if you had control, if you could dictate the Western response to the Georgian Green government, what would your dream response be, and how would it lead to or enable the collapse of this government?
Okay, I will start it. I hope my colleagues will join. I don't think. I don't know who is telling this, that the West has abandoned Georgia. I don't think this is the voice is coming from the majority of the Georgian population. This kind of narrative would be very much pleasant for the Russian supporters, or for those who would like to present the situation in that way. The people who are standing in the streets for more than 190 days now after the faked parliamentary elections, after the refusal of faked government to continue our path towards European integration, you will never hear something like that West has abandoned Georgia. This is not what the majority of the Georgian people think. This plays in hand of those who would like to exactly create the cracks in this huge pro-Western support still in place in Georgia. We didn't touch upon it, but Georgia always used to be and still remains the exceptional country in terms of the popular support towards the European Union and NATO. Throughout last 34 years, all the surveys had shown that Georgian population, the majority of the Georgian population, was very much in favor of our country joining the European Union. It was never the case in Moldova or Ukraine or any other Eastern Partnership Initiative countries until 2022, the 24th of February 2022. Then, of course, situation changed in Moldova and Ukraine. But in Georgia, people had very clear understanding that we need to move forward. What the Russian power, the Russian supporters try to do right now in Georgia is to create this division, to create the impression that there is also other Georgia. There are people who think that we have also a right to say something. And of course, you as a Russian actor cannot openly the society.
I'm sorry, but the question's not about Russia. The question is about that this is a narrative that you hear from a lot of Georgian opposition activists, and that
I've never heard something like that.
That the West should help us. The West is.
Could you please name opposition representative who has ever said that West has abandoned Georgia? I would be very much.
The Western leaders are not,
has never happened.
Too much of Georgian.
I do not recall. Please name one who has said like that, and I will tell you if he's with the opposition or not. If you can recall anyone. Literally, who has said, which party was it? From whom have you heard something like that West has abandoned it? We fully understand what is going on in Georgia, what is going on in Europe, and what kind of challenges and Europe faces right now. Who has said that? You mean the people who are pro-Western supporters, they say that West has abandoned Georgia? No, I don't believe so. This is what I can say. You interrupted, so this was my answer.
I also think that the West has not been abandoned Georgia. Yes, we need more active Western countries. We need more sanctions from the United States and from the European Union. But I don't think that we are abandoned.
Well, the narrative of abandonment, it actually does indeed play into the hands of Russia, because the Georgian Green is trying to prove to their own supporters that, you see, the West is unable to act, it's not doing anything, will be able to get a deal with Trump's administration or join the European Union in 2030, or if the West has abandoned us, in that case, the only rational way for us is to go to Russia. So if the West has no interest in this region, if the West is not ready to provide military security guarantees, then they have abandoned us. So first of all, we need to explain what this abandonment might actually mean. And I think that the people you talk to and the Georgian Green, they have different explanations to this term itself. Because for the GD, and what the GD is trying to do, they're trying to build up parallels with 1921, when Germany and the United Kingdom military left the Caucasus, and then it became a signal for Soviet Russia to invade. So what they're trying to communicate, and why I think that this narrative plays into the Russian hands, is that the West has given up Georgia, the West is not able or ready to act, so the only way for them is to capitulate, become something like Vichy government, and to go to Russia. If we want to criticize, for example, the EU or the United States, in that case I have 4 points where I think it will be reasonable to do it. The first one is creating false expectations. For example, then High Representative Borrell somehow mentioned 150 million that would go to Georgia's civil society. There is no such thing as 150 million. There were 145 million that part of them went to Ukraine, part of them went to Moldova, and I think there was like maybe 5 or 10 million max allocated for the cooperation with the Georgian government. And I think everybody here will confirm, since that has not seen this money. So there were no 10 million. And this narrative created by Borrell about 150 million euros, it was somehow very strange and nobody has seen this money. Number 2, the reaction from the Commission itself has been relatively slow. They have not been able to see the warning signs for the last at least 2 years, and they have been sending dubious signals to the Georgian Green and to the Georgian public. The third one is allowing Gigi to gaslight. And here I have the example of the European Union Ambassador Hirchinsky, who was cutting the ribbon together with Irakli Melashvili the next day or on the same day when the first iteration of the Russian law on foreign agents was introduced. Same day, thank you. So that's where I think we can criticize. Also, of course, the sanctions, they have already been mentioned. The inability of the European Union to impose sanctions because of Hungary and Slovakia also decreases the image of the West as a power that Ivanishvili should face. So if you are within Ivanishvili and if you are trying to push this narrative, you have the European Union, which is not able to impose sanctions. You have the United States, which is in a bit of a turmoil at this point of time. So he's not afraid of the West, on one hand. And on another hand, you have Russia, which has military capacity, of course very limited, and you know best how limited it is right now, and is ready to act. So I think, I don't know if I responded to your question, but I think these are the main narratives that you might be facing. And that's why the narrative of abandonment, I fully agree with Gigi here, it plays more into the hands of the Gigi and of Russia than into the hands of the pro-democratic, pro-European forces in this country.
Hello, thanks for your interesting speech. We see that situation has radically changed.
Excuse me, can I ask you to stand up for a second? Because we've been looking and trying to find the people who are talking, because there is this audio system and it is a little bit irritating for us. Thank you.
Thanks for your interesting speech. We all see that situation has radically changed in this world, and because of this new geopolitical order, Europe has to become an independent player on geopolitical chessboard. I mean, because of this United States new administration, Europe has to reshape also their security policy. And my question is, what kind of impact it should have on international security? Thank you.
Very easy question. Thank you. Okay. So first of all, I fully agree that the European Union has to become an independent actor, but I am a very strong believer in transatlantic relations, and I definitely think that it has to be done together with the United States of America. The fact that the European Union has military capacity, resources, human capital, I don't know, name it, to become a geopolitical actor, and has not done it yet, has lots of its own explanations, but at the same time, it should not be done against or in any way in response maybe to the United States of America. So this transatlantic cooperation, it is the basis of international security and international peace. So even though I fully support the EU becoming more efficient when it comes to security, it has to be done also in cooperation with the US. And of course, if we're talking about the European Union, it has lots of challenges. Unanimity with Hungary, with Slovakia is a bit of a challenge. Whom do I call in the European Union? Who, if eventually the European Union creates the European army, who makes the decision to deploy the troops? Because right now, it's a very bureaucratic scheme, to say the least. And also democracy within the European Union itself. Like, should the European Union citizens start electing the European president? Should it move in the direction of a more federation, or should it be a union of sovereign states plus defense union? All these questions need to be answered by the EU itself, and they need to be answered as soon as possible because the situation is changing very rapidly. We're absolutely right in this.
Nothing to thank you.
Hello everyone, and thank you for such a beautiful panel. So my question is about the next election in USA next year, and what do you think, how it can change the situation in their opinion or actions about the Black Sea and the region, especially Ukraine and other countries also? How it can affect?
So, we have Americans here. Can I redirect the question to you guys?
My opinion would be the...
We're still looking at you.
So, my opinion would be that the midterms would do very little to change the foreign policy of the Trump administration. Already, Congress, especially the Republicans in Congress, have little intention to actually mess with the Trump administration's foreign policy for the most part, or is the Trump America First a larger influence? And I don't feel that the elections will have a large impact on that kind of MAGA versus more Bush Republicans. I think the midterms will really just shift the more domestic focus of the U.S. rather than a foreign policy focus. You guys want to add anything?
I guess another thing to consider is the Democratic Party itself is currently at a bit of a point of contention. So we got a lot of domestic stuff going on that doesn't really provide a good picture of what a non-Trump administration will look like following. And especially with the midterms, I doubt that midterms themselves would be that impactful. Maybe if the administration should flip in the next big election, but even then, again, the Democratic Party itself is at a turning point.
I agree with everything they said. Basically, midterms are more domestic policy focused compared to foreign policy, and that is what the majority of the U.S. population, U.S. voting crowd right now believes, in terms of focusing on more social issues compared to economical issues. And leading into these midterms, I don't think that's going to be everyone's focus.
The only thing that I might take with my very limited knowledge of U.S. politics, maybe if the Senate and House foreign committees are under democratic control, they will try to exercise much more pressure on the administration. So that's probably the only positive change that we might get from the midterms. But again, I might be wrong.
I think they could apply more pressure, but whether or not the Trump administration is willing to bend is questionable.
I also think that at least initially the pressure would be applied in Gaza conflict, as that's been the primary conflict point between many of the foreign policy focused Democrats, as well as many major foreign policy Democrats. For example, Gigiadze, the senator from New Hampshire, are retiring this cycle. So there's several very Soviet and Russian focused senators who are retiring in this cycle, and the House might also follow a similar path, as many Democratic politicians who are on the older side have been retiring. So a lot of the foreign policy establishment of the Democratic Party, especially ones who were prominent during the fall of the Soviet Union and then have had this focus on the Russian sphere, have been kind of moving out of politics and it's interesting to see if that will have any impact on, even if the Democratic Party regains control of the foreign policy committees, if they lose these ranking members who are beginning to retire that focus on this region, will that lessen the focus on the region and shift it more, as with the larger shifts in the US, to China or the Middle East?
Thanks again, everyone, and for indulging in another question, right? I suppose when we talk about the Russia-China convergence, but I wonder how much of a convergence or what the limits or red line might be in terms of the Turkey-Russia relationship. Does Turkey or can Turkey impose some kind of break on Russia? As you mentioned in your presentations, Turkey is acting as a mediator and plays a very prominent role. Can it or is it holding back Russia at all? And you talk about the Montreal Convention, and is this some area where Turkey feels vulnerable? Do you see areas for conflict or cooperation in the Turkey-Russia relationship? Thank you.
Very interesting issue. From Turkish perspective, the red line is that they don't want to see new kind of Soviet Union here, because this was external, existential threat to Turkey, and the main issue why they became member of NATO in 20th century. So they don't want to see it again. It's their waters, but at the same time they want to make money with trade with Russia, with Ukraine, and so on. But again, it's not a strategic partnership. It's
situational,
opportunistic. Nothing more. Nothing serious.
I would fully agree. I mean, what we witness right now, that their impression of getting closer is just temporarily. I mean, it will not last long, because they have a lot of interest against each other in the region, and Turkey has never recognized the occupation of Crimea, has never recognized any setup which Russia has offered to the world, but nevertheless Russia needs Turkey right now for different reasons. And what we see is one side of the coin. There will be no real friendship between Russia and Ukraine. We don't believe in that, but at the same time, as has been already touched on several occasions, this 3+3 format is quite interesting, how it might work with all these three countries involved. I mean, we haven't touched about Iran and the role of Iran in that composition, which is also quite important considering the new developments with that dimension. But yeah, it's also called situational temporal friendship or collegiality with Russia.
Questions? Next on Jeff's question. Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey are strategic partners. Several reasons. For pipelines, which Georgia goes to Turkey. In case Georgia is moving towards Russia, what would be Turkey's reaction to this? Because definitely this move can damage this strategic partnership and economic interest of Turkey.
Good question. Everything will depend on what will be the red lines of Georgian government and the elections. We don't know yet what kind of Russian instruction will be implemented by the Georgian government. It will depend on that issue. Yes, of course, Turkey has its own interests and its own instruments also to have some kind of influence in Georgia. Let's see. We have to see what will be actions from the Georgian government in this regard.
Thank you.
Just to add a few words, Georgia has a strategic partnership as well with Azerbaijan and Turkey. After the Second Karabakh War, we have seen the opinions, we have heard the opinions that the Turkish role has been increased in the region, and Turkey has, of course, this mutual agreement with Azerbaijan, which many claim that is de facto bringing Azerbaijan into NATO, which of course is not the case. But anyway, I don't think that Turkey would be interested in somehow damaging the existing relations between Georgia, I mean this chain of countries, I mean Georgia, Turkey and Azerbaijan. So I think it will remain intact, and Turkey will try to strengthen it as much as possible.
Well, I think we also forgot a little bit about the elephant in the room, Iran, because it's also borders the Caucasus, and both the reaction of Turkey and the reaction of Azerbaijan will at least partially depend also on the developments with Iran, because right now it's not entirely clear how the US administration will take care of that issue. Jerusalem is very much preparing for a possible military interaction with Iran, and if we see a kind of American involvement in a military attempt to solve the issue with Iran, in that case, the situation in the Caucasus will also explode, and it's very hard to predict how. So that's also a topic that probably requires a little bit more of attention when we're talking about even the Caspian region in total, because if we have a full-blown war in Iran, that will change things in this region also significantly.
Are there any questions? Or thank you very much, gentlemen, for
Thank you.
insightful presentation.
Thank you.